Pollock. So for those who potentially remember, in 1949, Jackson Life magazine asked the question, they did a spread on Jackson Pollock and asked the question, he's the greatest living painter in the United States. And with that, what happened is that we have American artists, abstract expressionist, and Jackson Pollock put on the world map. So some years later, 1963, we have the Sunday Telegraph in London, which is a lot more affirmative after seeing a Rauschberg exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery. And they go on and say the most important American artist since Jackson Pollock is Rauschberg. So it felt necessary to continue after Jackson Pollock and talk about Robert Rauschberg. So here we are. But I must say that as I was preparing for this masterclass, more than once, I wonder what I got myself into, because Rauschberg careers span 6 decades, and he used all possible media. So painting, photography, silk prints, sculpture, dance, theater, and somehow he excelled in all of them and made an important contribution to all of them. So to try and condense it all was quite a challenge. So now that I've already asked for you to be lenient, I will look at Rauschberg mostly before 1964. Why is that? One of the most important events attached to Rauschberg takes place in 1964. And if I have a bit more time, I'll brush through the decades after. But what happened in 64? Here we are. He is the first American to receive the Venice Biennale Award for painting. So during the first part of the 20th century, Paris was the cradle of modern art. And in the 30s, with the rise of the Nazi Party and later during the Second World War, lots of artists came to New York. And then with Jackson Pollock, the abstract expressionist, we have a shift, and we see that the art, that modern art, is now taking place in America, in particular in New York City. So we have this shift from Paris to New York City. In 1964, it is the international recognition through Rauschberg that the city that now matters is New York City. So the event itself is very important in 20th century art history, but besides the symbolic value that it now carries, it is a great piece of art world drama and gossip, which is quite revealing of the atmosphere around Rauschberg. So I will spend a little bit of time on the Venice Biennale of 1964. So the US had just started giving public funding for the biennial exhibition. Everyone expected that the MoMA will be curating the pavilion like it did in the past. But the public institution that was now taking care of the biennial appointed Dr. Alan Solomon. He was the young director of the Jewish Museum in New York, who had given his first solo exhibition to Rauschberg in February 1963. And that was his first exhibition as the director of the museum. So he went to Venice and he saw the pavilion, the US pavilion, and he said it was too small. There was nothing to do to remedy that. So he asked the director of the biennial if it was possible to use the US consulate across the Gritti Palace. He had an agreement in principle from the director called Marquesan, and here you see some views of the exhibition that took place at the consulate. So when time came to decide on who will win the award, and that the name of Rauschberg started floating around, so members of the jury started opposing it. And one way of opposing it was to say that he wasn't in the main pavilion. So here you have I put a close up so that you could see here, you have Jasper Jones, here another Rauschberg, here you have the bed by Rauschberg. So all of that was at the US consulate. So you have 2 days of very tense negotiation that started in Venice, including like you had like Leo Castelli, Elena Sanaban. And at the end of the day, they all agreed that it can be Rauschberg because after all, there was like a small work by Rauschberg that was somewhere in the pavilion. So at that moment, Rauschberg shows up in Venice. So everybody thinks that it's to put more pressure on the jury and on the decision process to have the artist showing up. And this picture is circulated saying like, look, the Americans are moving the artworks into the pavilion to try and get the prize. The reality is that Rauschberg had no idea what was going on because he was coming to Venice as the stage manager and light designer of the Mercy Cunningham Dance Company. He had been collaborating for years with John Cage and Mercy Cunningham, and they were coming to perform Story at the Fenice. Sold out, amazing success, maybe because of all the drama going around him. And the day comes and he's awarded, he received the prize for painting. So at the time, he is working on his silk screen painting. So what is his reaction when he received the prize? He calls a friend in New York, asks him to go to the studio and to destroy all the screens that were there. So in this one event, there is a lot that makes Rauschberg art and life. So that's why I wanted to spend a bit of time on it. Controversy, sometimes completely despite himself. An undeterred joie de vivre, like he goes on, like, so they perform Story. There's like stories of dinners, lavish parties, collaboration with the best minds of his time. And perhaps more importantly, a complete refusal to repeat himself. So he was first and foremost against imposing his own taste, and he wanted his art to be a reflection not of his thought and feelings, but of the real world. So hence this reaction, I'm very good at something, I might be tempted to repeat myself, destroy all the screens. So because in Venice, what was praised was his combines. So here you have here, which is an hybrid between painting and sculpture, and his silk screen painting. So retro pedaling, like how did he get there? So Milton Rauschberg was born in Port Arthur, Texas, October 22nd, 1925, in a working class family. So they were not poor, but they had hard times. They were a member of the Church of Christ. So no dancing, no playing card, going to church every Sunday. And he was kind of a loner, like not a very good student in high school. And he went on to join the Navy, because he felt a need for structure and discipline. He always drew during his life, but he assumed that it was something that everybody was doing because he had no exposure to art whatsoever growing up. So he went for the first time to a museum before returning to his Navy camp, and he stopped at Huntington Gallery in San Marino, and that's what he saw, and that he kept that had a big impression on him. And that's from left to right: Thomas Lawrence Pinky, Gainsborough the Blue Boy, and Joshua Reynolds, Sarah Siddons as the Tragic Muse. And it was an absolute revelation for him because, first of all, he realized that one could be an artist, something that he had absolutely not conceived before. And secondly, he recognized the paintings from a deck of cards that he had been playing with. And for him, it brought the idea that art was actually part of his life, even without knowing. So in 1946, he finishes the Navy. He wants to go back home, goes to his parents, realizes that it's not really where he wants to be, goes to LA. And a friend of him sees his drawings. So she enrolls him to the Kansas City Art Institute that she knew because she was that's what's next to her family's place. He gets there, and that's when he decides to change his name. So Milton Rauschberg becomes Robert Rauschberg. He wants to be Bob. He thinks that Rauschberg is complicated enough. So he wants a very simple first name. So he then saves money to go to Paris because he wrongly assumes that it is still the place to be. And he arrives there and he meets this lady, Susan Vale, and they go together to the Académie Julian. So they don't really like the classes there. They spend most of their time at the Louvre. And one of the reasons you might not have liked the classes that you had like critique once a week. He didn't speak a word of French, so that must have been quite a difficult one. Plus, enjoying Paris at the time, post-war Paris, not speaking French must have been quite hard. So she went to Dalton for high school in New York. She already had art lessons. She has a better idea of what she wants and where to go. And so at the end of August 1948, she's going to North Carolina, and he follows her there. And they both arrive at Black Mountain College. So Black Mountain College, I'm going to stop on Black Mountain College a little bit because it's of utter importance in Rauschberg's life. So it was created in 1933 by John Andrew Rice, this guy, who was at the forefront in the US of the free school movement. 1933, it's also the year when the Bauhaus closes. And it closed because they refused to have Nazi members on their staff. So Philip Johnson, curator at the MoMA in architecture, sees Rice and convinces him to enroll 2 teachers for his school. Those teachers are Annie Albers and Joseph Albers. They arrive in Asheville, North Carolina on Thanksgiving 1933, not speaking a word of English. Joseph Albers is the most important teacher of Rauschberg. He calls him the great disciplinarian. And as we saw, he felt this need for discipline. And Rauschberg was never complacent with his work. So when he would see something potentially really good on a table and it was Rauschberg, he would always say, I don't want to know who made that. But the Bauhaus was all about art and life. So it was designed with use in mind. And so Albert's teaching revolved around the true nature of material. So he would give his students newspapers, trees, tree leaves, straws, and they had to make something out of it without using any tools so that they would understand the material they were working with and that they were using. For drawing, as you see him here on the right, he wanted people to understand what he called the efficiency of the line. So they would make lines until they had a complete steady hand. And for color, which Albers is quite known for, he said that you had to experiment their relation to one another. And so what comes out of it is that what is very important is to experiment, to not trust your own idea, and to work with the materials. So that's summer. Aside from Albers, we have here Buckminster Fuller, who's trying to work on the geodesic dome with students at Black Mountain. We have John Cage, who's teaching the structure of music and choreography, Mercy Cunningham, who's teaching modern dance, and William and Ellen de Kooning talking about painting. So not about summer to arrive. So June 1949, so that's a year later, he goes to New York. So because, so at Black Mountain College, you could come in and out. There was no curriculum per se, no structure to it. So he goes to New York, which is the actual place to be at that point, and signs up for the Art Student League. So he's still with Susan, and they make those blueprints that end up in Life magazine and in an exhibition on abstract photography at the MoMA, which is quite something for such young artists at the time. They also have this amazing relationship that is a little bit frowned upon in those years by their parents, who really like Rauschberg, but they eventually do get married in 1950. That same year, Rauschberg goes to see as well Betty Parson. So she's become the important art dealer. Peggy Guggenheim is left. She's taken over the abstract expressionist, from her. And he comes and see her. And she says, I think like say on the Thursday, and she only looked at art on Tuesdays. She makes an exception, looks at his work, and decides to give him a show on the spring of 1951. That's one of the pictures that were in the show. And it wasn't a success by any stretch of the imagination, neither critically nor financially, but it was still very important because she is the gallery to be. She's showing at that same year Lavender Mist by Pollock, the Kooning's Women, etc. So he's at the right place at that point. And also at the Parsons Gallery, he meets properly John Cage. And they collaborated for years to come after that. And the first thing they did that summer is this work. So it's 22 feet long. Rauschberg put together 20 sheets of paper, and they inked the back tire of John Cage Ford. So you see John Cage in his car here. And then he rolled slowly onto the paper so that they could make this work. And then that summer, they go back together to Black Mountain College. So meeting Cage was very important for Rauschberg, who still needed support, like psychologically was not a very assertive person at that point. And he found in Cage someone who very much shared his conceptions. So what are those conceptions? To them, since the Renaissance, the power of art has been to communicate ideas and emotions, and by organizing human life. So you would have meaningful pattern and the expression of the individual truth of the artist. They don't want that. They want an art of chance. They want to completely extinguish the artist's personality. So said like that, it sounds very negative, but for them, it means that art is a purposeless play, that it is an affirmation of life. So Rauschberg, basically what I'm trying to say, is against high art. He's against art for art's sake. When what he sees as the abstract expressionist, like self-pitying and self-centered approach, he wants to break all the barriers between art and life. So when he arrives at Black Mountain, he makes those white paintings, and they are completely white. They are not and they're meant to interact with the world around them. So they are a portal, if you wish, and it's the shadow of the person who's passing by, the different lights, etc., that are going to activate the paintings. So he even gives instructions, because the idea is that they should not age. They should remain completely white. It doesn't matter that it's the hand of the artist. And that will in turn inspire Cage to write 4 minutes, 33 seconds, a composition in 3 movements, which, as you can see, is for any instrument or combination of instruments, because it is completely silent. So it's complete silence for 4 minutes and 33 seconds. And the only way you know that it's 3 movements is because David Tudor, the pianist, gets up, open and close the piano. So in 1952, and that was inspired by Rauschberg in the sense that the white was this negative space, the same way that silence is this negative space. So in the summer of 52, they also do at Black Mountain the event. So nothing remains of the event. It wasn't filmed or photographed. Here are the notes of Cage. He is the one who sort of choreographed it and gave instruction to the different people who were part of it. And what he said about it has become the authority on it, because basically no one remembers the same thing about what happened that night. But apparently the audience was in the middle. John Cage was on a ladder giving a lecture. Then you had another ladder here where you had two poets who would go up at different times. Rauschberg was playing a phonograph with a horn. David Tudor was playing the piano, and Mercy Cunningham had a path for him and his dancers. Rauschberg, so here it says like Franz Klein suspended painting, but apparently there was also the white paintings of Rauschberg that were suspended as sort of as a canopy above the audience. So Suzanne, so his wife, comes that summer. She arrives after the event with their son, Christopher. And she will leave pretty quickly because he is now in another relationship. And that relationship is with Cy Twombly. So he will divorce from Susan Vale, but they remain close friends their whole life. And he was very close to his son as well. Right after that, he will go on a trip with Cy Twombly to Rome, Casablanca, Tetuan. So they live for a while. Rome becomes very important to Twombly, who will end up like living there. And Rauschberg like takes photographs, but also does two series of work. Fetici Personati, so it's like those found objects that he will place, and Scatole Personali, so personal fetishes and personal boxes. He exhibits them in Italy, first in Rome, and then it goes to Florence. And there's a critic, like an important critic in Florence, who said that it is so terrible that it should all be thrown in the Arno. And Rauschberg thinks that it's an excellent idea because he has no idea how to pack them back to go to New York. So he throws a bunch of them in the Arno and sends a letter to the critic saying, in a sense, thank you for the idea, done. And of course it is, but it's actually because he wasn't taking criticism very well at the time. And he sort of hoped in a very vindicative way that the critic will feel bad to be at the origin of like art destruction. But so when he comes back after this trip, so he has done those two series, he comes back to New York and he's going to have an exhibition at the Stable Gallery, a gallery that was opened by a lady called Eleanor Ward. And there he showed the white paintings that we talked about, as well as the black paintings, which is a series he made before his trip, where he dipped newspaper into black painting and then put them into on as a collage on canvas. And here you have a picture of Cy Twombly in the studio that they were sharing, and here a view of the exhibition at the Stable Gallery. And people considered that the exhibition was offensive, that it was childish scribbling by Twombly on the one hand. And I think that the one thing that the worst offenders were actually the fetishes. And the Twombly, so Eleanor Ward said after that the Twombly Rauschberg exhibition cost her half of her clientele and friends. So they were really, in a sense, they were seen as a joke, like a bad joke. And again, like we're in the middle of the epitome of abstract expressionism and high art. So his reaction was to move on to the red paintings, changing his palette. And those will be shown at Eggen Gallery. So he sold a pair for $50. And the reason he changed galleries, because in 53, 54, he exhibited at the Stable a painting with dirt to be watered so that there would be grass. And Ellen Ward said, well, I lost the other half of my friends and clients, so it was time to move on from showing Rauschberg. So it is collage, the red paintings, but it is still quite different from the modern art collage. If you look at Kurt Schwitters, for instance, as a comparison. Kurt Schwitters like uses the material to, like Albers was saying, order chaos, whereas Rauschberg has no intention of ordering chaos. He wants to work with the material. He doesn't want the material to work for him. So he starts using collage in a way that will more and more compel the viewer to come closer to the painting, to interact with the painting. A good example of that is this one, Rebut, in 55, where you have comics, you have the birth of, like a cheap reproduction of the birth of Venus, you have athletes, and it's completely at the opposite of abstract expressionism. Like you can't take it in at once, like you have to step towards it and look at it and take time with it. And because he is completely against this idea of the serious artist and his struggle. So he struggles. He is dirt poor at this point. He's in a studio on Fulton Street that he shares with Tombly. There's no heat. There's no running water. He has to go to France to take his bath. So he has like those conditions that are the same as Pollock. But when he goes uptown and talks to other artists, he realizes that they only talk about themselves and their feeling and how to express those feelings. And at the same time, there's Dien Bien Phu, there's McCarthyism. It's like the artist cannot be completely detached from that, from the real world. So one way he expressed it is when in a compelling way, I would say, is that the Beat Generation poets and writers like started like hanging out with the New York artists. And there is Allen Ginsberg, who wrote his poem Howl, and one line mentioned a sad cup of coffee. And Rauschberg said, well, I've had cold coffee and hot coffee, good coffee and lousy coffee, but I've never had a sad cup of coffee. So he's very matter of fact. And to make his point, he goes to see de Kooning, that he knows well at this point, and ask him if he can give him a drawing that he's going to erase. So initially, de Kooning is a bit skeptical about the whole idea, and then decides to do it and collaborate with Rauschberg and give him a very difficult to erase drawing with oil, like pastel, like all sorts of things. And it took a month it took Rauschberg a month to actually erase the painting. And this is the 1953 erased de Kooning drawing by Robert Rauschberg, where you only have like a trace of what was a de Kooning. And if nothing else, it's the first artwork ever made by subtraction. So, as he was saying, I don't want a picture to look like something it isn't. I want it to look like something it is. And I think a picture is more like the real world when it's made out of the real world. So he starts integrated more and more into his painting. And it's a trend that takes us to the combines. So those hybrid works that are between painting and sculpture. The first one, the first one to be considered combined is this one, Minutie. That was a portal that he used on stage for performance with Cage and Cunningham. He then started including like larger and larger objects into his work. And and in this sense, he very much inscribes himself in art history, because he's reversing the Renaissance. So the Renaissance had perspective, and you had the illusion through perspective. And then with the abstract expressionist, you want complete flatness, and the high art is to be completely flat. And he reversed the perspective. Now it's turned inside out. The picture comes into the viewer's face. So here it's Bed, one of the first ones. So he was in his studio and couldn't buy canvas, and he saw that quilt. So he stretched it and started painting on it. And he said, and it didn't work because the pattern of the quilt was so strong that there was nothing that paint could do with it. And it remained a bed, whatever he did. And so he added the pillow and started like painting onto the pillow. And then of course the bed is horizontal. So to make it his artwork, he made it vertical. Then another famous combine that he made is monogram. So apparently for this one, he saw this goat and harassed the shopkeeper for weeks for the guy to sell him this goat. Finally obtained a price and an approval. And he came back to the studio and struggled for weeks to know what to do with it, because he would first try to have the canvas on the wall, try and attach the goat, and it wasn't working. And it's actually Jasper Jones' idea to have the painting on the floor. Another one is Odalisque. So you have this box on a pillow, and Odalisque is an ode to, you have all the collages, most of the collages are reclining nude of women, and on top of it you have like this big male rooster that is like looking at all of them. So he does those hybrid works, like those combines, and they're absolutely not a success. When they're shown at Leo and Iliana Castelli Gallery in 1957, he sold 2, one to Castelli himself and one to a buyer that then returned it because of how much people gave them grief. So at the time he was with Jasper Jones, they had been together for a few years. Jasper Jones was like more successful. He had an exhibition that same year and sold full works to the MoMA. And they were both very transitional artists. So for painting relates to both art and life. Neither can be made. I try to act in the gap in between. So, and Jones is also very much playing into the gap. Like he works between reality and illusion, because what's important with this flag is that once it's made, it is a flag. It is not a representation of a flag. It is also itself an object. So we're in 1959, and Rauschberg feels like he's done everything he had to do with the combines, and he wants to break away from it. And that's when he moves to silkscreen painting. And the move comes about after he does a series of illustration of Dante's Inferno between 1959 and 1960, maybe to show that he could be serious and tackle serious themes. And so this series, like what he did is like he would take illustration clippings from newspapers and magazines, dip them in a light fluid, rub them face down on a paper, and then you would have like this sort of trace of what was the image. And he would then add drawings or watercolor painting. The problem with them is that you can only do them on a very small scale. And he likes this idea of transferring. And so that's how he starts playing with the ideas of the silk screen, the first one being in black and white. But because nothing is ever very linear with Rauschberg, before coming to color for silkscreen, he goes to Paris for a little bit, because he has at that point in 1961, he's become the lighting designer and stage manager of Mercy Cunningham. He goes to Paris. It's at the same time he's having an exhibition there, which is incredibly successful. And he meets Tinguely and Nikit Saint-Phal. They will travel together to Stockholm for Rauschberg exhibition, where Pontus Holsten, who will then become the Pompidou director, raise funds to buy Monogram. So they perform. He performed with Tinguely and Nikit Saint-Phal in Paris. So they're in this theater. So you have Nikit Saint-Phal shooting at her paintings. One of like the self-destructive machines of Tinguely, and Rauschberg, who you can see here, is like on the stage painting, and no one can see what he's painting. At the end of the performance, he rolls the painting, leaves very dramatically, and you could only go and see the painting the next day at the gallery. So they become very close. He meets the Nouveau Réaliste. and he's supposed to be part of a show by Iris Claire. So he might have, like, and he was supposed to give a portrait, which he might have forgotten to make because he was quite busy during the touring. And but whatever the case may be, he ended up sending a telegram saying, "This is a portrait of Iris Claire, if I say so," which was exhibited by the gallerist. So then he comes back to New York, and between the fall of 62 and spring of 64, that's when he works on his silk screen. And he still wants them to use chance and surprises. So he used images that are drawn from contemporary magazines, and his own photographs. And there is no sense of time, actually, because you can have here like a dented road sign, you can have the Statue of Liberty, a Velasquez, space exploration. So it feels quite random, and he would work on several of them at the same time so that he wouldn't get hung up onto one of them and its composition. And his brushstroke, as a result, and the painting that he used is not related. He doesn't want it to be related to any emotion, but to be related to mass culture. So he asked in 63, a few months before Kennedy's assassination, he had ordered the print. He had ordered the screen print to his maker, and before ever using it, because he went on tour with the dance company, Kennedy was assassinated, and the image became very tragic and emotional all of a sudden, and he wondered for a while if he should use it. And he ended up using it in 12 of his 80 silkscreen paintings, thinking that actually it was bearing witness of the life of images themselves. So at the same time in New York, so I said fall 62, at the same time, there's another artist who's using silk screen painting. So one is Rauschberg, and the other one is Andy Warhol. And they met on September 18, 1962, through a friend of theirs who was a curator at the Met. And they made a deal. Warhol, who had found a very good screen maker, will give the name to Rauschberg. And Rauschberg was to give to Warhol a few personal photographs. So it resulted in this work. Let Us Now Praise Famous Men, Rauschberg Family, 62 by Warhol. And the title is, on the one hand, from this book by James Agee and Walker Evans of 41. It was published in 41. But it was also part of a biblical text. Let us now praise famous men and our fathers that beget us. So quite an homage from on the part of Warhol. And that's where we have to look at Rauschberg's influence, really. There we go. On all the next generation of artists. So here he has like Warhol, like also you have Warhol on the right, and this combined with like the 3 bottle of Coke of 58. And Warhol always said that Rauschberg was an enormous influence and very important to him, because he said and repeated over and over again that there was no poor object. Now, we mentioned all the event, the fact that they rolled over with John Cage a piece of paper to make a print with the tires of the car. And that has a major influence on the happenings in the 60s in New York, although they didn't like the happenings. But and then you have those gesture, erased de drawing, and this is a portrait of Iris Claire, if I say so, and that was mentioned times and times again by conceptual artists. So in all of this, although he's very much recognized by the younger generation of artists as being crucial to their own expression, he still is considered an enfant terrible and mostly a joke. And it's only in 1963 when he has this exhibition organized by Dr. Alan Salomon at the Jewish Museum that comes a form of recognition, because it is a retrospective, and all of a sudden people in New York can see what we've just seen, where he comes from, all the things that he has done, like how they interact with each other, and how important his path has been, his cheminement. So at the same time, he's very successful in Paris. The Whitechapel Gallery show is completely sold out. People are queuing to try and go and see Rauschberg. And so at the end of the day, Salomon's decision to choose Rauschberg was also very strategical, because Rauschberg was already very known in Europe. And he finally, 63, 64 are the years when he's recognized at home and internationally, although he's already been at the inception of all those movements that will follow him, So I will stop in 64 because he continues on for another few decades, and he still has this eagerness to discover. So yeah, that's 66. But I think I've bombarded you with enough images and information, maybe.
Okay, so you're stopping in 1964, right?
Yes. He dies in 2005, so I can go on for quite a while.
I know, it's quite crazy. I was still into this. No one wants to stop, to be honest. So that was very interesting to see this not a retrospective, but the whole, the beginning, and because the idea of Rauschberg being like sort of a duality between conceptual art, and maybe Warhol helped him a lot to become more visual with the still screen, and that was very interesting also to see that he was near to Iris Claire, who was representing Yves Klein. And at the beginning, you mentioned and you show some photographs with naked women on the floor, and I thought this looks like Yves Klein. Is it like a direct influence? Would you think?
Because he hadn't been to Paris at this point. But what's quite interesting is that you have all those things that are happening in parallel, which are, like, for instance, like for pop art, like in 61, Warhol, Lichtenstein, and Rosenquist, like, all start separately, not knowing each other, painting from billboards and comic strips, etc., etc. But what they do have in common, though, is Rauschberg. They all know Rauschberg.
Oh, I see.
Yves Klein, they do meet in Paris, but I can't remember when Yves Klein did his first anthropomorphy, so I'm not sure whether that's
which
correct.
One? Yes.
They do look a lot like
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very interesting. So we have in the chat box, we have everybody's wanting to have a second part of this. So maybe that's going to be the next waiting for you to your PhD to work on the second session of Rauschberg. And so thank you so much, Reine. That was very interesting to go through this.
If everyone has like can stomach, like I can do 66 quickly, like.
Okay, let's go.
Just to show you, because he did a lot of, so he had like so many firsts, right? So sorry, I'm going through everything very quickly.
But it's still a mystery why he wanted to erase the painting. What were really his motivations to do that?
Well, de Kooning is a major abstract expressionist.
So he wanted to get rid of
it. Get rid of it, you know.
It's amazing that de Kooning accepted that. But,
yeah, but there still is a trace. Like he gave him something. Like it wasn't like a pencil painting. It's like after a month, you can still see something. So this, yes, there we go. Like I absolutely love that. So that's called Open School. So that was part of an event that he organized at the Armory in New York, and it's 9 evenings, and it's 10 artists that work with 30 scientists, and that's the first time that there is such a collaboration between art and science. And Rauschberg's evening is this one. So you have a tennis court. And so I can't remember the name of the tennis player, but she's a professional tennis player. She's playing against Frank Stella. And they have tennis, like Rauschberg goes for tennis because he considered that it's an improvised dance. The rackets are linked to a radio system. Each time they hit the ball, it goes with a bang, like there's a massive bang. So like that's the opera part of it. And also there are 48 lights, and each time the ball is hit, a light turns off. One of the lights turns off. And they kept on playing until it was completely dark. And then once it was completely dark, 300 people came onto the tennis court in the darkness, and you could only see them. They were projected onto screens through infrared cameras, and they would just come over and just say their names. And so in terms of like complete artwork, which incorporates like dance, performance, duration, and then once again it's like it's a first because he works with scientists, but you can also see like how it's going to influence like durational performances. And so I think, and that's 2 years after Venice, and that's after having destructed all of his silk screen because he doesn't want to repeat himself.
Oh, really? Okay. So he destroyed his silk screen.
So in so when he's told that that he was awarded the prize at the Biennale, he called a friend in New York and told him destroy all the not the painting themselves, but the screens, the one that are made by the commercial maker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it didn't stop for the prices to go up, but but he tried. All right, thank you so much again, Reine, and we hope to see you very soon. And thank you all of you for being so present and interested about this talk. And we'll see you very soon. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci.
Merci.